My name is Malin Archer, 35 years old. The Veterans Hall smelled like scorched coffee and floor wax, the kind that turns reflections into smears. Flags drooped from brass poles along the stage, their edges soft from decades of ceremonies. Folding chairs scraped little half-words across the boards as people shifted. I slipped in through a side door, planning to be no one, to find a seat in the back and let the night run its pre-written course. A pledge, a prayer, a cake that tasted like gratitude and shortening. My father spotted me before I made it to the shadows. He turned his body toward the crowd the way a man turns toward weather he believes he can command. The Taliban would laugh at a daughter like you, he announced. Not quietly, not to me, but to the room. Men with coin-bright eyes and shoulders that still remembered rucks. Women with ribbon pins and hands that had folded too many flags. Conversations thinned, then cut. The ceiling fans pushed a slow circle of air that somehow made the silence thicker. I kept walking. He wanted a flinch. He'd trained me not to give him one. Beside him stood a young Navy SEAL with a posture that said he'd stored strength in the places you only notice when you run out of it. My father's hand landed on the kid's shoulder like a stamp. "Now this," he boomed, baritone warmed for the theater. "This is a real warrior." Chairs settled. A cough tucked itself into a napkin. I tasted metal and lemon oil, a ghost of our old house, where his metals sat behind glass, like holy things that never had to apologize. I could have said 10 true sentences. I could have made the room my witness. Instead, I gave them nothing. Silence, used right, is a hinge. The young man didn't smile. He didn't puff his chest or tilt his chin the practiced half-inch of borrowed pride. He turned. His gaze found mine and held. Recognition detonated quietly. The little flinch at the outer corner of his eyes, the swallow 2 beats high in the throat. His jaw worked like a man remembering the shape of a thing he'd hoped was rumor. "Are you the angel of death?" he asked. He barely breathed it, but rooms like this carry what they want. The words moved in a low current along the rows. A Vietnam vet in the back straightened as if a sergeant had just walked in. A widow touched the silver cross at her throat and frowned like she was sorting stories into true and useful. The MC's hand drifted to the microphone and then away, the old instinct to save an awkward moment colliding with the older instinct to let it teach. My father's mouth hardened into a smile that had never fit me. "Some nickname," he said to no one in particular, the chuckle too loud for the sentence. "Stories get taller in the telling." The young man didn't look at him. "Ma'am," he said to me, louder now, respect steadying his voice. "You ran the web at—" He stopped. "Names aren't for rooms without clearances. You kept us breathing," he finished. "We owe you." He changed the pronoun. "I owe you." The floorboards listened. I swear they did. If you've never been in a space that knows what service costs, you can mistake that sound for nothing. It's weight redistributing. Chairs considering whether to stay seated or stand. The air tightened around my father's story, like a shirt starched wrong. I set my paper cup on a metal cart, hearing the thin ring of it like a bell. "Team effort," I said, "always." A man near the trophy case cleared his throat. "Which outfit?" he asked, not nosy, so much as checking if language could hold what the room suddenly suspected. "Enough," the SEAL answered, with a soldier's shrug, the kind that protects particulars and offers essence. My father adjusted his stance, drawing himself taller as if rank could be conjured from posture. "She files papers," he said, half to his reflection in the glass of the metal case, half to the town that had let him narrate weather for 30 years. "With respect, sir," the young man cut in, steel-wrapped in courtesy, "she doesn't file. You can tell when a community edits itself in real time. The room did the math. The MC, she once bandaged playground knees and told 2 generations to use their inside voices, lifted the mic again, thought better of it, and set it down. A cousin with my mother's eyebrows whispered, "Uncle Frank, maybe you don't know everything." The sentence arrived gentle, like a folded note passed in church. It still landed. My father's jaw ticked. He stared up at the flag like it could hand him a line. A veteran in a jacket heavy with patches stood slowly. He didn't salute. He just put his hand over his heart and kept it there. 1 chair over, another man mirrored him. Then a woman. Recognition is an old liturgy. No one had to call it to attention. It simply stood. I felt the old habit twitch in my spine, the one he taught me before he taught me to ride a bike. Heels together, eyes forward, don't blink fear away, own it. I didn't stand taller, I stood still. Still is different. Still is readiness without performance. Still lets other people find their balance. A low murmur passed. Not gossip. Calibration. People who'd known me as the girl with the crooked pigtails and the perfect attendance pin adjusted their maps. A man who once taught me to throw a baseball without flinching at the smack of the glove whispered, "Well, I'll be." His wife said, "Always knew," which was either kindness or a retroactive blessing. Both helped towns survive themselves. My father took a breath like a man about to step into cold water and said, "If any of this is true," the hedging small and mean in his mouth, "why didn't you tell me?" Because you never asked would have been easy and true. But truth and kindness are cousins that don't always travel together, and tonight needed both to get home alive. "I couldn't," I said. He heard the rest. Classification isn't only a stamp, it's a wound you learn to live around. The MC tried the mic a third time. It squealed, then obeyed. "Friends," she said, voice brisk with mercy, "let's take 5. Coffee's hot, and that cake is not getting younger. Then we'll come back and read the names we came to read." She didn't define honor. The room had already decided to use the verb form. Movement softened nerves. Cups clinked. Forks found frosting. In the line by the coffee urn, a man in a ball cap from a war most folks only know from documentaries said without looking up, "We're proud of you." His wife amended by muscle memory, "Always were," editing the town's history in my favor in a way that felt like someone straightening a crooked frame when they think no one's watching. The young seal drifted close enough that I could see the spray of salt freckles across his cheekbones. The sun's proof he'd been outdoors doing work worth none of us confessing. He lifted his cup in a small salute. "Thank you for the boring checklists," he said. "The boring parts keep us," I answered. He smiled, the quick kind a man gives when he recognizes his own survival in a sentence. My father hovered on the edge of it all, a landmark, unsure if the river had cut a new channel beneath him. He looked at my face, not like a judge weighing a plea, but like a man reading instructions in a language he should have learned years ago. "I expected a son," he said, the words set down carefully, as if they might explode. That was my mistake. "I didn't rescue him." "Legacy has more than one road," I said. "You just never drove mine." He swallowed. The muscles in his cheek unclenched, then remembered themselves. He glanced at the glass case like it might offer counsel. It reflected us both back in warps, the way old glass does when it finally admits it's made of sand and time. "Do you want me there?" he asked. Whatever you do that has chairs." "There's always a seat," I said. "You choose where to put your hands." He nodded, small, the way a man nods when a doctrine he's preached meets the map of a place he has never walked. He didn't say sorry. He said, "Drive safe." Later in the doorway, the code our family uses for 13 unsayable things. I know all 13. I carry them like batteries, weighty, useful, eventually spent. We filed back to the chairs. The pledge ran lower this time, steadier, the sound people make when they feel included in the sentence. During the reading of names, a few heads tilted toward me in an angle that asked nothing and offered everything. By the closing prayer, ordinary had returned to the room like it always does after a storm. The same, if you don't know where to look, moved, if you do. Outside, the night smelled like first rain pretending it had changed its mind. Remy, because of course he had a name, and of course it would be Remy, tapped the lintel twice as he passed under it out of habit. The small ritual we'd taught too many men to count. The sound was soft and immense at once. I didn't come to win a room. I came to sit among people who understood cost. But the pivot was done, and pivots become hinge lines in stories whether you tell them that way or not. If you want to understand why a young operator forgot how breath works when he looked at the woman his mentor had mocked, you have to see the house where floors squeaked like rules, the woman who slipped poems into my lunch bag, the posture drilled before handlebars. You have to watch a kitchen teach a girl that precision can be respect and cruelty, and that the difference is who gets to define it. You have to understand the long road that led us both into that room. I'll show you. The house I grew up in was neat enough to squeak. Floors waxed on Saturdays until they shone like rules, boots lined up heel to heel by the back door, Coats hung so evenly that shadows fell in formation. If you walked barefoot, you could hear the house complain, a squeak here, a click there, as though it didn't want anyone forgetting discipline followed us everywhere. My father made sure of that. His chair in the living room wasn't just furniture, it was a throne. You knew which one was his because the afternoon light carved a square across it, the kind of sunlight that felt like a rank insignia pinned to the carpet. Guests never sat there. I never dared. That square of light belonged to him, and in a way, so did the rest of us. He taught me to stand at attention before I could balance a bicycle, heels together, chin tilted, eyes locked straight ahead. Don't blink fear away, he'd say. Own it. At 8, too short to reach the sink without a stool, he'd set my shoulders with 2 fingers, step back, and inspect me like I was a rifle needing calibration. If I wobbled, we started over. If I got it right, there wasn't praise. There was again. The lessons extended everywhere. At 14, I knew how to iron a shirt with creases sharp enough to cut air. He showed me how to shave pills off sweaters with a razor, how to fold socks by mating them instead of balling them, how to stack pantry cans label out so you could inventory supper at a glance. A pantry door clicking shut sounded like a period in our house, final, unbending. Sundays smelled of starch, coffee, and lemon oil. He polished the metal case in the living room with reverence, tilting ribbons a 1/4 inch until precision turned into worship. He rarely spoke of the battles that earned them, only of the shine they deserved. Precision is respect, he'd say, angling a ribbon into place while I held my breath. Even now, crooked frames make me twitch. My mother lived in the same house but breathed a different air. A school teacher, she carried words like other women carried breath mints. She slipped poems into my lunch bag. Frost when I was stubborn, hues when I felt small. Read the last line aloud, she'd say, and I would, and somehow the kitchen grew larger, as if her voice had bent the walls outward just for me. She never contradicted my father. She weathered him. Not all storms are meant to be outrun, she whispered once, rubbing slow circles between my shoulder blades. Everything in our town had a rhythm you could set a watch by. Flags on porches in May, parades on the 4th of July, Friday night football, fish fry fundraisers at the VFW. People treated my father like a landmark, something permanent you didn't need directions to find because it anchored the map. When he walked into the grocery store, men tipped caps, women touched his elbow like he carried luck in his sleeve. To everyone else, he was the veteran hero. To me, he was the man who could make a room smaller with a single sentence. I learned early that being his daughter meant carrying his disappointment like an inheritance. At 12, he took me to an Army-Navy game. The stadium throbbed with brass bands and cadets marching in long coats. I screamed myself hoarse for Navy. He didn't hush me, but he didn't look at me either. Later in the car, he said, "Leave those colors to men who can carry them." It wasn't shouted, it was worse. It was delivered the way a weatherman says rain is inevitable. That night, I kept my scarf on in the back seat so he wouldn't see my throat work when I swallowed tears. Even then, I understood. His silence could cut sharper than any word. By high school, I ran track, not because I loved the burn, but because moving fast made sense when standing still didn't. I chased perfect grades, collected first-place ribbons, and worked harder than anyone else. When I brought home a flawless math test, he only murmured, like a man checking his watch. When I won a cross-country meet, he said, "Don't lengthen your stride. Efficiency wins races." Praise was rationed like water in a desert, measured, sparse, never wasted on me. The day I said I wanted to join the Navy, he folded the newspaper with surgical precision, lined the edges with the table, and said, "You don't have the Constitution." His voice was flat, his eyes still glued to the print. Constitution. He meant stamina, maybe law, maybe both. Then, finally glancing up, he added, "You want attention, not service." My mother stood at the sink, rinsing her hands longer than soap required, each splash like a countdown she never voiced. I bit my lip so hard it left a scar inside. "Attention," he'd said. As if the only reason I wanted to wear a uniform was to steal light he believed belonged to sons. But I applied anyway. At 16, I sat at my desk under a stenciled lampshade my mother had painted with tiny leaves. While the house slept, I filled out the application, writing about dawn runs by the Chesapeake and the way a formation moved like a single long breath. I wrote about loving a country enough to argue with its flaws. I didn't show my father the essay. I showed my mother. She read it twice, then handed it back as though it were too important to belong to her. "Keep this voice," she said. "The map will change. Your compass shouldn't." When the thin envelope came, acknowledging receipt, I hid it inside a book of state birds. When the thick envelope arrived in March, the river behind the mill was swollen, elbows of white foam breaking against stone. I held that letter to my chest, the paper hot as a brand. I waited until my father was in his chair, then handed it over with the single word he trained me to use: "Sir." He slid it open with a letter opener shaped like a sword, read the first line, "We are pleased to offer," and stopped. Without finishing, he slid the letter back into its envelope, the envelope back to me, as though it were a hot plate. "We'll discuss logistics," he said. We never did. At graduation, my mother strung white lights in the maple tree and set out lemonade in a too-small punch bowl. Neighbors came with potato salad and stories about how I'd sold them cookies door to door with crooked pigtails. My father had a meeting at the Legion that ran long. By the time he got home, the ice had melted, the lights sagged with heat, and I was already rinsing paper plates in the sink. He went to bed without saying a word. The morning I left for Annapolis, the sky was the pale gray of a shirt before starch. My mother tucked 3 envelopes into my duffel. "Open when you're lonely. Open when you're hurt. Open when you forget who you are." She hugged me so hard, my ribs counted it. My father stood on the porch, hands buried in pockets, gaze locked on a horizon only he could see. "Change the oil when it's time," he said. I answered the way he'd drilled into me, "Yes, sir." That was the blessing we had. And with that, I stepped into a world that would strip me down, test the nails that held me together, and eventually build me into the woman my father had sworn I could never be. But to understand how the world rebuilt me, you have to first see how it tried to break me. Annapolis stripped me bare in ways my father could never have imagined. Plebe. Summer wasn't just a test of muscle or memory. It was a dismantling, a deliberate tearing down of everything soft, lazy, or unprepared inside me. Dawn tasted of Chesapeake salt and sweat. We ran until the blisters on my heels bled into my socks, and then we ran more. The barracks reeked of starch, fear, and adrenaline, the air humming with shouted orders, and the slap of boots on waxed floors. I learned fast. Pain was a clock, and you told time by what hurt. Shoulders screaming during push-ups, lungs clawing for air during swims, calves hard as stone after endless drills. My father's lessons made me efficient. Heels together, eyes forward, never wobble. But my mother's lessons kept me human. On the nights when exhaustion blurred into despair, I'd hear her whisper in memory, "Not all storms are meant to be outrun." Letters home became a ritual. I wrote 2 for everyone I sent, one to my mother, one to my father. Hers were full of adjectives, colors, and moments. The bay at sunrise, the burn of rope against my palms, the pride of finishing last in a sprint but never quitting. His were stripped of adornment, a catalog of nouns and numbers. Laps swum, drills completed, scores earned. I mailed both. She answered with warmth. His came back once, unopened, a creased dead center like he'd folded the sentence itself in half. Still, I clung to hope. I thought if I just pushed hard enough, achieved more, he'd see me. Recognition wasn't love, but it was something. Commissioning day smelled of brass polish and fresh-cut grass. Bars gleamed on my shoulders, glinting like promises. I mailed my mother a photo. She put it on the mantel. I mailed my father the same one. He tucked it in a drawer with batteries and rubber bands, useful things that eventually ran out. Then came the call, the kind you think you'll be ready for until it arrives. Biopsy, my mother said. The syllables like a quiz word she wished I'd spell wrong. My father emailed updates like weather reports, numbers, dates, no adjectives. He used we for appointments and she for pain. By the time hospice parked out front, I was already on the next flight. The house had rearranged itself around the hospital bed. Antiseptic overlaid the lemon oil he still used on the metal case. My father stood by the window, with his hands clasped behind his back, as if waiting for a parade that never came. My mother, pale but steady, searched the air with her hand until she found my sleeve. "Keep flying," she whispered. "Not away, just up." It was the last instruction I ever obeyed without revision. At her funeral, my father spoke first. He told the maple tree story again. The storm that took the tree but spared the flag, and no one corrected the details, though the wind he described had shifted directions twice. I spoke second. I talked about the way she slipped poems into my lunch bag, how lemon oil and library books harmonized in our house, how the kitchen always had room for one more chair because she believed food was a language everyone understood. My father's jaw worked the whole time, like a man grinding coffee beans without a grinder. When the casseroles arrived, people touched his arm and called him sir, even in our kitchen. I washed dishes until my fingers pruned, replaying her last words. "Keep flying." But flying doesn't erase the gravity of grief. It only teaches you where the ground is. That night, I walked past the glass metal case, laid my palm against the cold pane, and felt the difference between respect and permission. He had spent years teaching me the first. She had given me the second. It was then I knew. The Navy wasn't just my path out. It was the only place I could redefine what legacy meant. My father wanted a son to carry his torch. My mother had given me matches and told me to start my own fire. So I did. I went back to Annapolis with grief folded tight in my chest and resolve burning hotter than the Chesapeake sun. I didn't join to spite him. I joined because service had carved itself into me deeper than his disappointment ever could. And because I had a promise to keep, one whispered by a mother who believed storms could be faced, even if they couldn't be outrun. The Navy reshaped me, but it never softened me. If anything, it sharpened the edges my father had already carved. Plebe summer had stripped me to bone and sinew. Deployments welded me back together with steel and shadows. War is not what movies sell you. There are no trumpet calls when the helicopters lift off. No swelling music when boots hit foreign soil. What there is, instead, is logistics. Sand grinding into skin until it bleeds. Radios that lie when the batteries slip half a volt. Dust that sneaks into rifles and lungs with equal malice. And maps. Always maps. That became my world. The web. Routes threaded through neighborhoods that argued with themselves. Contingencies sketched like ribs around the heart of a plan. While others chased glory, I chased probability. My job wasn't to be seen. It was to make sure the ones who were seen came home alive. The first time a mission pivoted on my word, I learned the weight of silence. A convoy stalled 2 blocks short, panic rising in voices over comms. I didn't get poetic. "Route C," I said. Calm, clipped. 3 steeples in a line. Men adjusted. Lives bent away from fire. At the corner with the blue door, the target reached for a phone that never woke, its tower already lulled to sleep by our interference. Hands behind his head, no fireworks, no headlines, just breath, survival. That night, Hill, the chief with a laugh like gravel, tapped the grease pencil lines on my overlay. "You spun it," he said. "Not praise, not awe, just recognition." That was enough. The nickname came later. At first, it drifted in on enemy chatter, the angel of death. A phrase spat like a curse when the AC-130 stitched light across a dark valley, guided by maps I had drawn steady enough to aim. I never claimed it. I never wanted it. But names travel faster than truth. A young operator from Louisiana once drew a little hourglass in the corner of my map with a Sharpie. "Angel," he joked. I told him to find a better pen. But rumors are stubborn. In chow halls, in the back of transports, whispers carried. Not the loud applause of myths, but the quiet edge of respect born in the shadow of survival. Remy came to me then, young, jaw tight like he was keeping his breath from trembling. He briefed too fast, tripping over his own eagerness. I slowed him down. "Repeat the boring parts," I told him. "The boring parts keep you alive." He knocked twice on my table before stepping out, adopting the ritual the platoon had already half believed in. We built rituals like armor. Knock twice before leaving the room. Carry a card with 4 numbers in case the worst hole opens under your feet. Ask, "How's your air?" in the chow line, and wait for the answer. Small things, unremarkable to outsiders, but inside our circle, they became liturgy. Loss still came. It always does. Sometimes it wore a flag, and a folded triangle of sorrow. Other times it was quieter. A man staring too long at doors, a cup leaving rings of salt where sleep used to be. I learned to watch for those signs, to nudge men toward talking before silence drowned them. Soft fixes, some called them, but soft fixes kept hard days survivable. Love tried to find me once, wearing a civilian grin and an easy laugh. He liked that I laughed like someone who had earned oxygen. He didn't like that my phone rang at 0200 and I left without promising when I'd return. He wanted to fix my calendar. I wanted to fix his definition of bravery. We ended it before resentment grew teeth. Respect replaced romance. Respect became enough. Not applause, not headlines, not medals polished behind glass, but the nod of a man alive because of a checklist, the steady breath of someone who'd made it through a night that wanted to erase him. That was the world I carried back home, even when my father's silence echoed louder than bullets. In his eyes, I still filed papers. In the eyes of those who walked back into daylight because of me, I carried weight that mattered. But to understand how that reputation came to own me, how it became a curse and a crown, you need to know about the night it nearly broke me. The desert taught me its own language. Heat that pressed down like a hand, sand that crept into everything, eyes, lungs, rifles, even prayer. Out there, the romance of combat shriveled. What remained was logistics. Courage wasn't shouting into the wind. Courage was keeping a schedule when the clock hated you. I became fluent in the choreography of survival. My maps looked like webs, routes drawn not for elegance, but for possibility. Contingencies curled around every fragile hope. Men would glance at them, see only lines, then walk into the night with more confidence than they admitted. Because somewhere, behind the lines, was a woman who had already rehearsed their deaths and chosen life instead. The nickname followed me deeper into the sand, Angel of Death. I never claimed it, but it clung. Some said it came from intercepted chatter, enemies snarling about an angel who turned their traps to dust. Others said it started with the Louisiana kid's Sharpie, the little hourglass he scribbled on my maps. Either way, it stuck. Soldiers began to whisper it in tents, over burnt coffee, after nights that ended with more men alive than expected. At first, I bristled. I wasn't death. I was math. I was logistics, timing, the probability that shifted a bullet half an inch. But death and life sit too close together out there. And when people start calling you something, it doesn't matter if you argue. The name walks into the room before you do. Remy grew under my watch. He started as a boy with too many verbs in his briefs, words tripping over each other like puppies. By his third mission, his voice had slowed, each sentence clipped, deliberate. He learned the art of silence, that holding a pause could steady a room better than filling it. One night, after a drill that left us soaked in sweat and dust, he lingered by my table. "Thanks for making space I could fit inside," he said, cheeks red with something more than heat. I didn't answer, just slid a bottle of water his way. Some truths are acknowledged without being named. Hill, the gravel-voiced chief, once told me, "You like webs. You're setting silk I can't see." I smiled without smiling. He wasn't wrong. I didn't need anyone to see the threads. I only needed them to hold. Torres, brash and loud, mocked my checklists at first. "Widow's church," he called them, rolling his eyes. But weeks later, I caught him laminating one of my routines, sliding it into his vest pocket like contraband. Men sneer at what they secretly need. Loss came anyway. A diver swallowed by the sea that didn't return him. A young man whose laugh stopped echoing in chow lines. Grief wasn't always a folded flag. Sometimes it was a silence at a table, a missing knock before stepping out. I carried them all. Every absence a weight in my chest, every survival a thread tied to my hands. Some nights, I'd sit with my maps spread across a wobbling table, radios hissing in the background, and wonder if the nickname fit after all. Maybe death wasn't just the bodies buried. Maybe it was the shadow trailing even the victories, the whisper that reminded me every saved breath had been bartered with another loss somewhere else. One night, far from anything familiar, the enemy tested us with patience instead of fire. Waiting is harder than running. The radio lines jittered, men fidgeted, breath shortened. I stared at wavering signals until they steadied into intent. "Not tonight," I murmured, shifting 3 pieces on a board only 6 of us could see. The threat dissolved. No medal for that. Just quiet. Just men sleeping a little deeper. Quiet became my favorite kind of victory. But victories don't erase scars. They sit alongside them, like mismatched siblings forced to share a room. And slowly, I began to understand. This reputation, this ghost of a name, was shaping me as much as I shaped the missions. I wasn't the angel of death because I claimed it. I was her because other people needed me to be. And yet, beneath the sand, the sweat, and the silence, another truth pulsed. A truth no one else could see. That reputation was a burden, and one day it would demand a price I wasn't sure I could pay. War has a way of hollowing you out and filling you with contradictions. You carry both victories and ghosts, laughter and grief. By my 5th year in, I had both hands full. The missions blurred together, some triumphant, some survivable, some that still woke me sweating in the barracks with the taste of iron in my mouth. Loss always arrived uninvited. Not the kind wrapped in a flag with a bugle crying over it, but quieter losses. A man who stopped telling jokes, another who started measuring doors with his eyes, a third who couldn't sleep without keeping one boot on. I started watching for the signs. A cup left too long on a desk, a ring of salt from coffee that never got finished. Silence where there used to be noise. Logistics wasn't just maps and timings anymore, it was survival of the soul. That's when I started rewriting the rituals. We already had the knock, twice on the table before leaving. But I added more, a laminated card in every vest, 4 phone numbers, 4 chances for someone to pick up if the worst happened. A question at chow, "How's your air?" And the rule was, you waited for the answer. Not fine, not good, a real answer. Some men rolled their eyes, called it soft. I didn't argue. Weeks later, it saved one of them when a quiet kid finally admitted he couldn't breathe right in the silence. Remy was the first to take it seriously. He carried the card in his breast pocket like scripture. He slowed his briefings, stripped them down until they were spare and precise. The boy with too many verbs became a man who could command a room with silence. He didn't say much to me then, but he always knocked twice. Sometimes that sound alone was enough to remind me why I kept doing this. Torres mocked it until it saved him. Hill, old gravel voice, started asking, "How's your air?" in the chow line with a weight that made men actually answer. The rituals became armor, the kind you didn't wear, but carried. Still, I wasn't untouchable. Love tried to find me again. He wasn't military, civilian, with a laugh that softened my edges. He liked that I laughed like someone who'd fought for oxygen and won, but he didn't like the phone calls at 0200, or that I left without saying when I'd be back. He wanted to fix my calendar. I wanted to fix his idea of bravery. We broke before it turned cruel. After him, I stopped trying to build a life outside. The Navy was my life. The rituals were my family. Men like Hill, Torres, and Remy. They became my brothers in ways blood had failed me. And yet, even in that family, the name followed me. Angel of Death. Sometimes said with awe, sometimes with unease, sometimes whispered like a prayer. I hated it. I never asked for it, but I carried it because they needed me to. Because sometimes, in the middle of the night, when plans unraveled and silence grew teeth, they needed to believe someone could hold it together. One night, after a mission that didn't go clean, loss etched into the air like smoke, I sat at my table, maps spread out, hands shaking so badly I had to sit on them. Hill slid a bottle of water next to me. He didn't say a word. That's how men like him show they see you. And that's when it hit me. This reputation, this ghost name, it wasn't about me. It wasn't even about death. It was about carrying weight so others didn't crumble. The angel wasn't a person. It was a role. But roles have costs. Every name you don't choose becomes a cage. And I was starting to feel the bars close in. Grief doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in, subtle at first. A change in tone during phone calls, a pause too long when someone answers. For me, it came in the form of emails from my father, written like weather reports. Numbers, dates, no adjectives. Biopsy scheduled. Chemotherapy starting. Prognosis uncertain. He used "we" when describing appointments, but she when writing about the pain. I dropped into silence between missions, clinging to any moment I could call home. My mother's voice was thinner, but still threaded with warmth. She'd ask about birds, about whether the sunsets overseas looked like the ones back home. "Read me something," she'd say, and I'd pull out a poem I kept folded in my ruck, whispering verses into the crackle of a bad connection. She pretended the static was applause. When hospice parked in front of the house, I was already in motion. Flying home felt like running underwater, every mile heavier than the last. The house smelled of antiseptic, but her presence filled the room like always, gentle, steady, determined to give even her last days a shape of comfort. My father stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, posture carved from pride and helplessness. Her hand found my sleeve, fingers trembling, but her voice sure. "Keep flying," she whispered. "Not away, just up." It was the final order she ever gave me. I obeyed. The funeral was small, the kind of gathering where every casserole came with a condolence no one could finish saying. My father spoke first, retelling his favorite story, the storm that felled the maple tree but spared the flag. He told it 3 times that week, as if repetition could make it truer. People nodded, grateful for a story they could hold without splinters. I spoke after him. I talked about her classroom, where she tucked poems into pockets like talismans, about lemon oil on Sundays, the way she made a kitchen bigger by believing every chair deserved to be filled. My father's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He didn't interrupt, didn't contradict. He just clenched and unclenched his fists like he was trying to grind the air into obedience. When the last neighbor left and the kitchen was a graveyard of foil-covered dishes, I washed plates until my hands pruned. Grief is an inventory of what remains, I thought, and what remained between me and my father was a canyon wide enough to swallow us whole. That night, before I left, I stood in front of the glass metal case, my palm pressed against the cold pane, the metals glinting back like indifferent stars. Respect gleamed there, but love was nowhere. I understood then, respect is not permission, and I no longer needed either from him. I returned to duty carrying her final words like contraband folded into my chest. Keep flying. Not away, not to escape him, but up, into the life she'd believed I could have, into the kind of service that made space for others to breathe. But grief has a long memory, and though I carried her wisdom into the desert, a part of me always circled back to that house, that case, that silence. Because storms don't end just because someone tells you to outrun them. Some storms wait. Some storms grow, and mine was still brewing, waiting for the day it would collide with my father's pride in a room full of veterans who thought they already knew the story. The Veterans Hall carried the same smell it always had: burned coffee, floor wax, and old wood polished by generations of elbows. Flags hung heavy, their edges curling like tired sentries. I had come to sit quietly in the back, clap when names were read, then slip out into the night with nothing more than the hum of memory. But my father was already waiting, positioned at the center like a landmark nobody questioned. He spotted me before I'd taken 3 steps inside. His baritone rolled through the hall like a forecast, steady and merciless. "The Taliban would laugh at a daughter like you." The words hit the room like a slammed door. Forks paused midair. Conversations folded in on themselves. The old floor listened, tuned to the frequency of shame and pride. My father didn't glance at me. He didn't need to. He aimed for an audience, not for me. His hand clamped down on the shoulder of the young Navy SEAL at his side. "Now this," he boomed, squeezing as though pride could be wrung from the boy's bones. "This is a real warrior." The boy, Remy, though he hadn't introduced himself yet, stiffened. He didn't puff up. He didn't smile. His eyes found mine, and the air changed density. Recognition moved through him like current, a micro flinch at the edge of his gaze, a swallow snagging halfway down his throat, his shoulders squared as if against a wind only he could feel. "Are you the angel of death?" he asked. He didn't mean for the room to hear, but the room did. The words ran across folding chairs, through rows of veterans who sat up straighter, through widows whose hands fluttered toward ribbon pins on their blouses. Someone whispered, "What did he say?" The answer floated back, "She's somebody." My father's jaw tightened into a smile that never belonged to him. "Some nickname," he said, voice forced light. "Stories get taller in the telling." But Remy didn't look away, his voice louder now, steadied by respect. "Ma'am, you ran the web at Kara. You spun the roots at Alnor when the trucks—" He cut himself off, recognizing classification lines too heavy to cross in public. "You kept us breathing," he finished. I owe you." Silence pressed harder. A man near the trophy case cleared his throat. "Which outfit?" he asked, reflex more than curiosity. "Enough," Remy answered, the soldier's way of saying all that needed saying without breaking what still needed mending. My father drew himself taller, the way he always did when a story started slipping out of his hands. "She files papers," he said, tone half to the medals gleaming in their glass case, half to the veterans who had spent decades letting him narrate weather. "With respect, sir," Remy cut in, steel wrapped in courtesy. "She doesn't file." It landed like a hammer. The MC, a woman who had once bandaged playground knees, lifted the microphone, then put it back down. Even she knew better than to interrupt a space learning new gravity. A cousin with my mother's eyebrows murmured, "Uncle Frank, maybe you don't know everything." Her words landed soft, but the room caught them like sparks. A veteran in a jacket rustling with patches stood. He didn't salute. He placed his hand over his heart. The gesture traveled, one man, then another, then a woman with a service ribbon. Recognition spread without command. No one called attention. Respect simply rose. I stood still. Stillness is not the absence of movement. Stillness is readiness without performance. My stillness gave the room balance. Let them measure their breath against mine. My father looked at the flag like it could supply a script. His lips moved around a sentence he never finished. For the first time in my life, he was the one unmoored. "If any of this is true," he muttered finally, voice punctured by a breath he didn't want to show, "why didn't you tell me?" I met his eyes. I couldn't. That was all. He heard the rest. The MC saved the moment with a practiced pivot. "Friends, let's take 5. Coffee's hot and the cake's not getting younger." She didn't say honor, but the room already knew it was the verb for the night. At the coffee urn, small-town kindness patched over nerves. A man who once taught me to bait a hook muttered, "We're proud of you." His wife added, "Always were." Editing history in my favor with mercy. Remy drifted close, freckles sharp under the fluorescent lights. He lifted his cup in a small salute. "Thank you for the boring checklists." "The boring parts keep us," I answered. Behind him, my father hovered, his authority cracking like glass under pressure. He looked at me, not as a judge, not as a soldier, but as a man who'd just discovered a language he should have learned years ago. His mouth opened, closed. Finally he muttered, "I expected a son. That was my mistake." The words trembled in the air like a truce no one had asked for. After the ceremony, when the hall had emptied of sheet cake plates and folded chairs, I found myself standing on the porch outside, the night air cool and damp with the promise of rain. Conversation still hummed inside, men trading war stories, women tidying up. But out here, it was just me and the sound of gravel under slow footsteps. My father emerged from the doorway, hands buried in his pockets. For once, he didn't lead with a sentence designed for an audience. He stopped a few feet away, looking out at the parking lot like it might deliver him an answer. His voice, when it came, was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know." It wasn't an accusation, not even a defense, just 4 words, heavy as sandbags. I stared at him, remembering all the years of silence, of folded letters returned unopened, of medals worshipped, while my own service was ignored. "I didn't tell you," I admitted, then softer. "I couldn't, and you didn't ask." He flinched like the words struck deeper than he expected. For a long while, neither of us spoke. A streetlight buzzed, moths circling the glow as if trying to burn themselves on a truth too bright. Finally, he exhaled, shoulders slumping under the weight of decades. "I expected a son. Thought legacy traveled one road. I was wrong." Hearing him say it didn't erase the years, but it cracked something open. I didn't rush to absolve him. "Mercy isn't a coupon you redeem at the register," I simply said, "then start there." We stood together in silence, not reconciled, not healed, but not at war anymore. Behind us, the door creaked. Remy stepped out, hovering like he wasn't sure he belonged. He carried his cup still, steam long gone cold. "Sir," he said, addressing my father, his tone stripped of apology, "some of us owe her with birthdays." His eyes shifted to me. "I'm one of them." My father blinked as though the sentence required translation. He nodded once, sharp, the only acknowledgement he seemed capable of. But it was enough. Later that night, I found a folded piece of paper slipped under my windshield wiper. In neat, blocky handwriting. Ma'am, thank you for getting my brother home. No name, no return address, just gratitude carved into ink. The next morning, I sat at my father's kitchen table, the same table where he'd once inspected my posture, where my mother had read poems that made the walls expand. The varnish still bubbled in a circle where I'd set down a pot too hot years ago. He rested his finger there now, tracing the mark like an apology. Do you want me there? He asked, voice rough. At anything you do, wherever there's a chair. I thought of the rituals, the knock, the laminated cards, the questions that saved lives. There was always a chair, always room. There's a seat, I said. You decide where to put your hands. We didn't shake, we didn't hug, but for the first time we weren't standing on opposite sides of a war. In the weeks that followed, echoes of that night in the Veterans Hall reached me in unexpected ways. A widow from church mailed me a note in her looping cursive. We stood up because you stood still. A high school classmate I hadn't spoken to in years wrote, I thought toughness meant loud. You taught me different. The chaplain on base pulled me aside, eyes kind, and said, Old rooms can change their minds. Yours did. Then came the letter from my father. No return address, though I knew his hand as well as I knew the lines on my own palm. Inside was a clipping from the local paper, 3 paragraphs dry as dust, reporting on the Veterans' Night. Buried in the middle was a sentence. The community stood to honor service. Beneath the article, in his spare script, he'd written, I should have stood sooner. I pinned it on the wall above my desk, next to a map of a county no one needed mapping, and let it remind me that even stone eventually yields to weather. Remy stopped by not long after, heading out to teach a block he once swore he wasn't good enough for. He brought his mother's pecan pie in a dented tin, awkward in his hands. We sat on crates instead of chairs because chairs lie about power. He cleared his throat. That night in the hall, I didn't freeze to make you small. I froze because the truth caught up, and I didn't want to drop it. You held it, I said. That was enough. When he left, he knocked twice on the doorframe. A small sound, but it rang like liturgy. Our amen. On a Saturday with sky practicing spring, I visited my mother's grave. The grass had grown back over grief's scuffed places. I set my palm on the stone. We're learning, I whispered. Slow, but not in the wrong direction. A breeze lifted, rattling the oak leaves, turning pages somewhere I couldn't see. People still ask me about the nickname. They wanted an origin story, the neat myth of a single night where it began. I told them the truth. It doesn't matter who first said it. What matters is what you do when someone brings you a name you didn't order. You can spend your life performing it, or you can use it like a tool, a lever, a pry bar to lift what needs lifting. I chose the second. When I hear Angel of Death, I don't think of shadows or fear. I think of the soft fail we put on the table before the night went wrong. I think of the boring checklists that kept birthdays on calendars. I think of a room that rose to its feet because one woman refused to shrink. That night in the Veterans Hall didn't crown me. It unshackled me. For the first time, my father's voice wasn't the one holding the room. For the first time, he wasn't the author of my story. And though reconciliation with him would never be a parade, it became something quieter, more durable. A truce forged not in medals or myths, but in the recognition that legacies travel many roads. The world still calls me by a name I never claimed, but I've learned how to carry it, not as a curse, not as a crown, but as a compass. Because honor doesn't live in titles. It lives in the rituals that keep people breathing. The knock, the card, the question asked at the right time, and the stillness that lets others stand. Blood didn't salute that night. Honor did. That's the sentence I keep. Not because it flatters me, but because it reminds me where to put my hands when old rooms get new weather.